Last year in 2014, a record number, 3,419 U.S. citizens renounced their citizenship and gave up their U.S. passports. And unfortunately, that record's not going to last. It'll likely be broken this year and again the following year. The reason is taxes. America has the world's most oppressive tax regime, and the cost of staying compliant is going up. And many Americans living abroad find their U.S. citizenship to be a liability rather than an asset, and they're willing to spend a lot of money to renounce that citizenship. In fact, up until 2010, the form that you needed to fill out to give up your citizenship was free. Now in 2010, they imposed a fee of $450, which made the U.S. The most expensive nation with which to renounce your citizenship. Yet people had no problem paying it, and last year they increased the cost of that form to $2,350. And again, record numbers of people were willing to pay that just for the privilege of renouncing their citizenship. Now, I think the cost of that form is going to continue to rise with the benefits of giving up your citizenship, because I think the Internal Revenue Service is going to continue to turn up the heat on Americans both here and abroad, but making it particularly expensive to comply with those laws, especially now that the U.S. government has enlisted or forced the help of foreign financial institutions in enforcing these tax laws. In fact, the United States is one of only 2 nations in the world that taxes its citizens on their worldwide income. In other words, it's a tax on the privilege of being a citizen. The only other country that does it is a country in northern Africa that basically nobody has heard of. And in fact, even that country, the tax rate on the global income of its citizens is just 2%. Whereas in the United States, you're talking about upwards of 40% in a marginal rate of tax, and who knows how much higher that rate might go in the future. In fact, the origin of this worldwide income tax system is in the Civil War. That's where the income tax was first enacted, along with paper money. That we got a lot of bad things that came out of the Civil War. Of course, freeing the slaves was one of the few good things that we got, but we got the worldwide taxation. And in fact, the motivation behind it, when the war started, the Union was having a hard time getting volunteers. The Confederacy had no trouble in encouraging people to volunteer for the cause, but the Union had to resort to conscription. And it was the first time we had a draft in this country, and of course a lot of people didn't want to fight, and they left the country to avoid the draft. And so the idea of taxing Americans, no matter where they lived, was in effect a way to tax the draft dodgers. They didn't want people to also dodge the income tax when they dodged the draft. So the income tax applied to Americans even if they didn't live here. But the rate, there was 2 rates. There was 3% and the top rate was 5%. So it wasn't that bad compared to what we have now, but that's where the concept originated. Now, when the war ended, the income tax ended shortly thereafter, and so too did paper money. The greenbacks disappeared. Unfortunately, both have since been resurrected, but in a much worse form, because now the marginal tax rate is not 5% max, it's above 40%. And the Federal Reserve notes we have now, the greenbacks during the Civil War days were redeemable in gold. They were backed by gold and redeemable in gold. Now the Federal Reserve notes are backed by Treasury debt, subprime mortgages, auto loans, and they're not redeemable in anything. Now, as the U.S. government continues to turn up the heat, I said, on American citizens, not only here, but living abroad, who knows how high the cost to buy that form to renounce your citizenship could go. It could go to maybe $10,000 or maybe more. I mean, at some point, America could be like a giant debtor's prison, whereas if you have a U.S. citizenship, you can never get rid of it. Because now it's not about dodging the draft, but it's about dodging your share of the national debt. See, Americans today are born with an enormous burden, repaying the debts of prior generations. And as many Americans decide that they can't shoulder that burden, that they want to renounce their citizenship and look for more economic freedom in other countries, the cost of giving up that liability is going to get higher and higher. And of course, who knows how much higher income taxes may go in the future, which means the benefit of giving up your citizenship will be that much greater, and the cost of doing it that much higher. But there might be a point of political resistance where there's no way for the government to try to collect the taxes it needs through taxation, through income taxes. The most likely source of funding will be through inflation, where the government will simply print the money and spend it into circulation to meet its obligations, although it's not actually meeting them because it's repaying them in money that doesn't buy very much. The inflation tax is going to be one that no American can avoid if they own US dollars. But it's one tax that you can avoid, and you don't have to renounce your citizenship. You don't have to buy an expensive form or pay a tax to renounce. All you have to do is renounce your dollars by holding gold or silver. If you hold real money that the Federal Reserve can't create, they can't tax you through inflation. So my advice to Americans who are still living in the United States, you don't have to renounce your citizenship to avoid or dodge the inflation tax. You just have to renounce the dollar. And obviously not in its daily use. You certainly can spend dollars and transact in dollars, but when it comes to your savings, when it comes to putting away money for the future, because you want to access its purchasing power in the future, you need to renounce the US dollar, and you need to save in real money, gold or silver, something that the US government, that the Federal Reserve just can't print into existence at will, something that has real value and something that you can count on to preserve its value into the future. And the cost of renouncing your dollars and acquiring gold and silver is very low.